I'm so excited to introduce today's guest on Rise Market. She's the founding attorney at our firm Gen Esquire Law. She's an educator, soldier, advocate for POC rights, and she's quickly becoming one of the defining voices of the ongoing social rights movement. Please welcome Janelle Romero.
We need to talk. I'm getting so sick of seeing you guys throw away perfectly good cases. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining me today and, to give the community more insight on how to build a strong workplace discrimination lawsuit.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I just saw on the news, okay, not the news, but on your TikTok that you're now able to represent clients outside of New York, and that is amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, and I love how they reached out to you. So, you're doing,
Yeah, I've been really lucky with that in my career, thankfully. So
I feel like it's all hustle, no luck. I swear, I always see you posting, responding to people, and really putting the work in. So, congratulations.
thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, if only it happened sooner, because I would have loved for you to represent my case.
Oh,
It, yeah.
I definitely want to hear more about that.
Definitely. Okay, so do you mind giving a quick recap? How did we meet?
You just reached out to me. You seemed so cool. You were like, "Hey, I want to like dress you up and take some pictures of you and ask you some questions." And I was like, "Oh my
Yes.
God, let's do it."
Okay, so I was going through the process of building my case and seeking out different resources, and it was so overwhelming because I had never sued anyone before. And so when I came across your TikTok and I left a few comments, I was shocked that you responded right away because I had been reaching out to some lawyers for advice, but they didn't respond the way you did. And when you're a working woman in the city, no family around, the only person of color on the corporate floor, that information you gave me, it gave me strength, hope to keep fighting. And I just want to thank you again.
Oh, stop. You're gonna make me cry.
So, as I go through the corporate world and I hear about people's experience, I often find that they'll say things like, oh, I already deleted all my evidence. I didn't even know what a contingency lawyer was. I didn't know what options were available to me, which that's why I feel like TikTok is such a valuable resource.
Yeah.
For the purpose of this video, do you mind explaining what a contingency lawyer is?
Yeah. So actually, most types of plaintiffs' lawyers are contingency lawyers. Like most people think of it like in terms of like personal injury, like when you get into a car accident, but like we work on contingency and employment law, which basically means that you don't pay any money up front. And your lawyers will only get paid if you get paid. So if there's a settlement or a verdict in your favor where you're going to receive money, your attorney will receive a percentage of the money that you receive. So you're not really paying anything out of pocket for your case.
Okay, got it. So do you take contingency cases too?
Yeah, all of our cases are contingency. We don't charge our clients up front.
Oh my God, that's amazing. So what inspired your journey into the legal profession, particularly this field of law?
Um, like most things in my life, I think I kind of just fell into it, to be
Yeah.
honest. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Actually, when I was in college, I was pre-med for
Oh,
like the
wow.
but I was terrible at math. And I reached a
Same
point where
here. It's okay.
I started getting into like the really serious math courses. And I was like, I cannot do this. And I went to my guidance counselor and I was like, I don't know why, but maybe it's like an immigrant parent thing. I was just like, I'm
I
gonna be a doctor or
understand.
a lawyer. Like, I gotta do something that I know I'm gonna be like, successful or like financially okay. So I went to my guidance counselor and I was like, I don't think I can be a doctor anymore, but maybe I can be a lawyer. And my guidance counselor was like, I don't know, you're really soft-spoken and, maybe there's just other things that you'd want to consider. And for some reason, that to me was like, you're going to law school. And whether you become a lawyer or not, like,
Now you
I have
have to
to do
prove
it.
them
Yeah,
wrong.
like now I have to do it.
I love
So
it.
I did. I went to law school, and I even when I went to law school, I still didn't know or think I was going to be a lawyer. Um, I was just kind of like, let's see where it takes me. And I guess, like, not worst case scenario, but I guess if nothing else worked out, I'd be a lawyer, so I'll be okay. Um, and when I graduated, I looked at different jobs, and I started working. I actually like tried working for a few different types of firms, testing out like different areas of law that just weren't for me.
Mhm.
And I started working with this employment firm where most of the clients were Spanish speaking undocumented immigrants who were being paid like under the table, and they were not being paid minimum wage or overtime and things like that. And I got to see how amazing it feels to like hand somebody who works 80 hours a week and makes like $6 an hour, and you get to hand them a check for like 80 grand and see like their reactions
Yeah,
and what it would kind of do for their lives. And I think after that, I was just sold on employment law, um,
it's
which
so
kind of,
rewarding.
yeah, it was amazing. And that kind of just spiraled into like a lot of those people had discrimination cases. So then I wanted to learn how to do discrimination, but I always wanted to stay within the realm of employment. And thankfully it's gotten me here. So I'm
Yeah.
still loving it.
You're definitely on the right path, and I love that your journey into this was just natural. It was like almost like your calling, which is amazing.
Yeah, I like to go with the flow. I think the flow will always take you where you need to be. So,
Exactly. Yeah. So, drawing from your extensive experience, what are the steps you would say are the most crucial for someone who wants to pursue a federal court case, correct me if I'm wrong, for employee discrimination?
so not every employee discrimination case has to be federal. A lot of employment attorneys prefer to be in state court. Personally, I just prefer to be in federal court. I don't even think it makes much of a difference from the client's perspective. It's more of just how things are handled, how things are scheduled. Like from an attorney perspective, it's just a little more structured.
Yeah.
Um, But when you are preparing to file a lawsuit or even considering finding an employee, I think really the preparation starts while you're still in the company. The preparation should start like while you're going through that situation. A lot
Yeah.
of people that I speak to are not necessarily ready to file a lawsuit just yet. They may still be with the company, they may still be in the midst of the discrimination, but that's really the best time to speak to an attorney, because that's when you're able to make sure that you're not creating, but like getting all the evidence that you're going to need.
Right.
Um, because things can be said to you and you didn't record it. Maybe you're not in a one party recording state, or, like you're not expecting someone to come up to you and make a certain comment. So you're not just sitting there with your phone on record waiting for someone to
Right.
explain to you. Um, but there's things you can do after the fact, like writing a letter to HR. A lot of people don't like to reach out to HR because they're like, HR is just not going to help me. They're not going to do anything for me. It's just going to cause problems for me.
Mhm.
And while I am an advocate for HR, I do think that there are really great people in HR who really do care and want to do good work. At the end of the day, HR is paid by the company to make sure the company doesn't have problems.
Right.
So they're not they're not there to be your best friend. They're there to solve your problem to the extent that they can, so that the company is not going to have any issues with you. Like the company's not
Right.
going to pay them to hurt themselves.
So they're there for the company.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people don't realize that when I speak to people who are going through this and they need advice, I have to tell them, be careful what you say to HR.
Yeah, and I think when you're speaking to HR, you should be, well, first of all, you should always try to do it in writing. And if you have to do
Right.
it verbally, you should send an email summarizing it and kind of solidifying what you said in writing so that you have some sort of evidence or have it recorded. Because when you're speaking to HR, you should be thinking of it from the perspective of the evidence that you want to create or the paper trail that you want to create.
Right.
So if somebody called you a racial slur, you should say that to HR. Make it very clear and state that you feel you're going through discrimination and you're going through race discrimination. not because you're trying to prove it to HR or convince HR to help you, but because if HR doesn't do anything, you now have evidence that you very clearly went to HR and complained of these things. And so sometimes people will try to be very cautious with the things that they say to HR because they don't want to like set off the company or do something that will maybe get them in more trouble. And so they'll be kind of vague and say, you know, this person's not really being very nice to me, or I'm having issues with this person. Can you please look into it? And that's not really going to sound off any alarms. Like the word discrimination to a company is going to ring some alarm bells, because that's when they know that, you know, they're kind of facing potential fire here and they need to see what they can do to put that fire out. So when you're writing to HR, you want to be very specific, you want to be very detailed, and you want to basically, if down the line you have to talk to somebody like me to try to, you know, get your case going, the first thing I'm going to ask you is what kind of evidence do you have to show for it? And so whatever you would think to say to me, you want it in writing to HR, regardless of how you think they're going to react. Even if you do think they're going to punish you after. I will say, not everybody's in a position to be willing to lose their jobs in that moment. And so sometimes I can completely understand that some people would be afraid to go to HR because they're afraid of retaliation. Retaliation does get added onto your lawsuit. It does strengthen your claims in some way. It does make your lawsuit bigger in terms of like what we're seeking for you, but lawsuits don't settle or go to trial right away. And so I never want to put someone in a position that they're unemployed and unable to pay their bills just because they wanted to jump to a lawsuit. So that is something you do have to be careful of, and maybe you gather evidence in other ways before you go to HR, but ultimately you do want to involve the company, even if they don't have an HR. Like if you tell your manager, legally that manager is required to tell whoever higher up would be responsible for handling that. If you tell the owner of the company, they're responsible for handling that, like even if it's a small business. So gathering that evidence and creating that evidence beforehand is super important. And it's not just evidence of what happened, it's also evidence of the emotional distress it's causing you. If you're seeing a doctor or a therapist and you're going to that doctor or therapist and complaining and saying, I'm so depressed, I'm so anxious, tell them why. Like, don't just, you know, throw a million problems into it and say, I don't know what's wrong. If what's causing you anxiety is your manager, tell your therapist, because that's going to go into their records, and that's going to help me show that the emotional distress that you faced rose to a medical level, that now you're seeing somebody to help you with that. You know, maybe you're even being medicated for it. For some people, it could cause a divorce. It could cause like so many, it goes into so many deeper things, and I need proof of it. So you want to be super detailed in every aspect that you can, so that if you're in a position where you're no longer with the company, or, you know, they don't have to necessarily fire you, you can also be constructively terminated, which is like you're put in a position where things are so bad that you don't have a choice and you just have to leave. And even in that case, again, be specific in your resignation letter. Make it clear that the reason you're leaving is because of the discrimination or retaliation you faced or sexual harassment that you faced, and you can't take it anymore, so you have to go. Because that's going to help show that. And then, you know, once you're no longer there, usually, because you don't necessarily have to be out of the company to file a lawsuit, but it's not great.
I always hear sue when you get a new job, not while you're still there.
I mean, it's just like not the best case scenario for you to be
tension. Oh my God.
And they, you know, if they're smart, they wouldn't fire you for suing them, because then you have a retaliation claim. But at the same time, like, you're not gonna have a good time, and they're probably not gonna be so great to you.
They're going to try to push you out.
And if you think they're gonna do that anyway, you might as well let them push you out, and then, you know, do something about it, find another job in the meantime. Then you want to find an attorney and speak to an attorney. If you can't find one right away, you can go to the EEOC in the process. You can file with the EEOC online by yourself. You don't have to like have any formal legal training or writing or anything like that. You literally just like type out your story. They'll schedule a meeting with an investigator and you'll get that going. Either way, like that's my first step because in order
Mhm.
to sue in federal court, we have to get a letter from the EEOC pretty much giving us the permission to bring that lawsuit in federal court.
Okay,
So,
so that's actually the question, one of the questions that I asked you on TikTok. For people who don't know, what is the EEOC?
so the EEOC is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They're in every state, they're federal. So you can actually, they've made it a lot easier, like within the last 6 months, probably, that everything can be done online. You,
I did my process online, so yeah.
because before we were like faxing things in, it was not a good time. But now you can file everything online, and like I said, they'll assign an investigator. They'll speak to you. You can technically handle your entire case through the EEOC. They can even schedule a mediation for you in the EEOC, and you guys can go back and forth arguing on your claims, get it handled there, and you'll never have to get an attorney involved. And I've even found people on TikTok who are like, I don't really know what they call themselves, like HR employment consultants. And they'll kind
I've
of
seen
go
that, yeah.
through that process of like handling your own case in the EEOC. Um, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that it wouldn't be the best thing for everybody, especially if you feel like you have a really strong case with a lot of evidence. You want to maximize that. You want to get an attorney that's going to like push that to the maximum amount that you can.
So I
Um,
had heard that if you file with the EOC, you have less control versus working with a personal attorney. Is that true to some degree?
It may be. I don't know necessarily that it's that you have less control, but you definitely have less guidance, because you're handling it yourself. So
Right.
you're kind of relying on the EEOC investigator to guide you through that process. And, maybe if you like have one of those consultants or something. But when you have an attorney, it's kind of like someone you can hide behind. Like you never have to talk to well, you can't. Like they can't reach out to you. They can't talk to you anymore. Like everything has to go through your attorney.
Right.
And if they come to you and they say, fine, we'll give you 20 grand. Maybe you on your own in the EEOC would be like, okay, fine, I'll take 20 grand. Like that's not bad. Whereas your attorney has seen hundreds of these cases and they're like, over my dead body, would I let my client take $20,000 for what's going on? Like, are
I
you
love
kidding
it.
me? And so that's why I say, like, I think it kind of depends on the strength of your case, how much evidence you have, um, because, maybe they'll offer more money and more money and more money. And if you are with trial attorneys, with real litigators, because not all attorneys are willing to take your case to trial, and they're not offering as much as your attorney knows you can get, they'll take it to trial. And that's when you hear of these huge settlements that come out, or not settlements, like verdicts, because you don't actually know what cases settle for unless you're actually settling them, because when you do settle a case, you sign a settlement agreement which has a confidentiality clause. So that's like kind of a hurdle that we have a lot of times with clients, is that they'll come in and they have a case, but maybe they don't have like the strongest case ever, and they'll say, I'm not settling for less than $1 million because I'm suing like this massive company that's worth billions of dollars. And that's not really how it works.
Sadly, no.
It's not like just because the company has a ton of money, we get to get a bunch of money. Like we kind of, we have to push and argue for as much as we can. It helps when we know that they have the money to pay. But yeah, I mean, it really just, you kind of have to be in there seeing what they're settling for, because there's no real scale that says like, if they make you this sad, you get this much money for it.
Right. Yeah.
So not having access to that sort of database, and then hearing like the person who sued Equinox got like $8 million. And it's like, yeah, well, they went to trial. How long did that take them? What kind of evidence did they have? Like, what kind of story were they looking at? Because that was not a settlement. That was a verdict. And then usually like that verdict, I think, got appealed. And then they'll try to reduce it, which will still be like a substantial amount. But if that person had just gone through the EEOC and handled it themselves, and let's say like Equinox had offered them $100,000, they might have been like, that's great, I'll take it. And so
Right.
that's why I think when you have an attorney, you have more guidance and more protection with someone who's experienced in knowing like the actual value of what you can get out of your case instead of like what you're just be willing to take.
Okay, yeah, that's really helpful. I wanted to touch back on when you mentioned gathering evidence. So, from my experience, I've worked in offices and with people across Los Angeles, London, and beyond. And one thing that I'll notice is that, in today's social climate, instead of the usual derogatory name calling, people are now experiencing these more subtle yet manipulative tactics that include nitpicking, selective criticism, being passed up for promotions and raises. So, how can victims in these specific cases effectively document these behaviors to strengthen their case? Because I've heard that companies can argue that they just didn't like the person, and disliking someone isn't illegal, right? So, how can these victims protect themselves?
That's a really good question because these cases are a lot harder and they're a lot more common.
Right.
As time goes on, like people aren't, especially in like corporate jobs and things, people aren't really being called racial slurs so up front. We file a lot of cases for like microaggressions. And a lot of that, including that famous Equinox case, didn't necessarily have to do with what that person was being told, but more so the environment and something called disparate impact, which is really, really helpful in proving something like that. So let's say like you are the only minority on your team and everybody else got promoted and you have more experience than some of the other people on the team and you're the only person who didn't get promoted. Why? if
Right.
Now it hurts your argument if there is another minority on the team who did get promoted. So those are the things you have to look at. A lot of times people will say, well, I don't know why this person doesn't like me. I don't know why they're treating me differently. And I'm like, well, you got to look around and kind of figure it out because I can't bring a lawsuit because they don't like you or because they're bullying you. So, you know, if you think they're having an issue with you because you're pregnant, are there other pregnant people there? How are those people being treated? Is this
Yeah.
something that all the pregnant people are dealing with? Talk to them, listen to their experiences, try to figure out in a way in those types of situations, you may have to kind of be your own detective a little bit, um, because it's not enough to not just like you. They have to not like you because of a protected class that you belong
Right.
to, your race, your religion, your gender, things like that. And so, um, you can still, once you figure that out, you do the same process. Like you can go to HR and you can say, I feel like I'm being discriminated against or I'm being treated differently because of my race. And here's 10 examples why. Those examples are super important and you want to bring up every single one you can because if I have two examples of how I'm treated differently, it may raise a red flag. If I have 10 examples, it's a little more obvious. Like a lot of what I do is storytelling. And so even when I do a consultation with somebody who might have a case, I really don't like to do it like a lawyer. I feel like people, for some reason, get like a little nervous and they feel like they have to talk in a certain way. And they're like, okay,
I
here's the
was a
evidence.
little nervous. My first few intake calls when I was shopping for my lawyer, I would rehearse because I wanted them to take my case so badly. But after a few intake calls, I was like, let me just be myself and tell them what was going on.
Yeah, that's the best way to do it. I feel like I can tell when people are talking to me like they're like going in for a job interview and their case, and I'm like, okay, like let's back up, act like I'm your friend, and you're
Right.
what happened. Like just talk to me, like give me your gossip. Because a big part of my job is listening to your workplace gossip. And so it's a lot easier when you're just talking to me about what happened. I can ask you questions and be like, really? And then what did they say? Like when this happened? And then we can
Right.
go through your story like that because that's what I'm going to do, just in a more professional, legal way. And so when I'm presenting your story, even if I don't have direct evidence that something was said about you for your race, if and sometimes it may not even be about you directly. Like sometimes you'll notice you're being treated a certain way and they may never make a comment to you about your race, but then a customer will come in and the customer is of the same race as you and they'll make a comment about the customer, or they'll be like, hey, go watch that person, or showing you something about them having an issue with this
Their
type of
character.
that
Yeah.
you also happen to be.
Right.
um so I need you to tell me your story with as many examples as you can think of, so that when I have to repeat your story, I don't have to so blatantly, like, ideally, I'd be able to give the examples of what happened, and the judge listening would be like, well, clearly they have an issue with her because of her race. Like,
Right.
pretty self-explanatory, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so having those examples, especially when you're going to HR and you're like, here are 10 things that have happened. They're only happening to me. They're not happening to this other person. Like me and this other person got hired at the same time, same role. They're paid $20,000 more than me. They're getting promoted faster. They're getting all these opportunities that I'm not. There's only one difference
Right.
between us. Um,
So
and
when it
s-
comes to, highlighting these microaggressions to a judge or for a case, would you say that maybe keeping a personal journal or diary of every day would be helpful?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
'Cause the first thing I'm going to ask you for is a timeline. And I'm going
Okay.
to give you some time to sit down. I don't want to hear it all on the phone because I know you're going to forget something, but I want a bullet point list that says, in May, I got a new manager. And the first time I noticed that we had an issue was in the middle of May. She made this comment to me. By the end of May, she did this. Then she said this in front of all these people. Like, I just want a bullet point list of everything that happened. And if you're keeping track of that as it's going on, it's a lot easier, not only when you're talking to me, but also when you're making that complaint to HR. And, it comes off a lot stronger when you can give all of those examples and all of the witnesses that were there that saw it happen, than when you're just saying, hey, this person's not being nice to me. And I think it's because of my race.
Yeah. Great. That's amazing advice. I know that was really long. Thank you. So there are a lot of people of color who can't understand legalese. I struggled to read my contracts at first too. And as a result, they see contingency lawyers. So, what are some signs that people should watch out for to help them decide who is the right lawyer or firm for them?
Um, I do think that your retainer agreement is part of it. Like, you do want to make sure that the firm is not gonna have. I don't know. I don't really think a lot of firms have like predatory retainer agreements. Because I mean, you could like complain to the bar and get them in trouble, but
Oh, I didn't know that, but okay.
um, but
Because I think a lot of people are scared of lawyers and they'll hear of stories where, just scary stories about it. So,
yeah, I think um your lawyer is the person who's holding your hand through this process, and you're basically holding their hand and letting them walk you through it. You
right.
shouldn't do that with someone you're afraid of. Um, you should feel comfortable calling and emailing your lawyer if you have any questions. You should feel comfortable that like your lawyer's going to update you. Lawsuits take a long time and things happen on long time frames. So we may file this document and their response to the document is not due for like 30 or 60 days. That means I don't have an update for you for another 30 to 60 days. So if you call my office every week, I'm not going to have much to say to you.
Right. Let
Like,
me do my work.
right.
Right.
So it's perfectly fine to call your attorney and be like, hey, are there any updates in the case? You just have to also be a little realistic about the timelines that you're dealing with. But overall, your lawyer should be somebody that you're comfortable talking to. I think some people may have this misconception that if your lawyer seems like a big bad bully, that's like a good thing because that means that they'll be like a tough bulldog that will fight your case for you. Um, I don't necessarily agree with that. Um, I think that like
Mhm.
your evidence and your story speaks for itself. There's a reason that we sue under laws. We don't just sue under like who can fight the hardest. Um,
This isn't a boxing ring.
Yeah, exactly. So like I've had so many like depositions and where, we're kind of going back and forth and like it turns into like a screaming match because the other attorney thinks that like if they can talk louder or be more aggressive, like they're going to be right and you're going to back down. And, I can say no with a smile calmly, and it will mean no just as
With
much as
grace, yeah.
scream no in my face. It's still no. Like
I
there's
love it.
there's no need for like the whole show of it all, which I think a lot of lawyers just do for their clients, really, to like put on this whole performance. And it's just annoying. Like, it's like,
Yeah,
why are you doing this? Like, at the end of the day, you screaming it is not going to make you more right. Like, I could just go before the judge, and because that's really what it is. Like, ultimately, if we're both arguing back and forth and we can't come to a solution, then we just go tell mom. Like, we go to the
right,
judge and we're like, the issue, and we both explain it to the judge, and then the judge is going to decide what to do from there. So ultimately, I think that your lawyer should just be somebody that you feel comfortable with, that you feel like trusts you. Something that I'm very proud of that a lot of my clients say to me is like, you really helped me. I really felt like you like listened to me and understood me. Um, and that doesn't really have anything to do with what I'm doing. Like, they don't see what I'm doing in court or how I'm speaking to the other attorney or the judge or whatever. It's really just how I'm speaking to them and how I'm informing them of things along the way. Um, and I think that the more trust you have in your lawyer, the more confident they are carrying your case and the more information they have too. Like, some people, I think when they're afraid of their lawyers, they'll kind of not tell the whole story. And so, um, they'll tell you about how the person made a racist comment towards them, but they may not tell you that they punched the person in the face for it. And so then,
oh
we're
no.
in court, and then I all of a sudden from the other attorney, I'm hearing like, yeah, but did you know that your client literally assaulted my client? And then
Backhanded me.
that was useful information to have before it went
Right.
before the judge, and looks like a dumbass. And so, yeah, I think like your lawyer should almost kind of, you should pick your lawyer like you pick your doctor. Like, you don't want to go to somebody that you feel uncomfortable or afraid of.
I
Um,
totally agree. I've honestly had pretty good conversations when I was looking for my attorney, and I think just one person stuck out, and he was trying to convince me that because they hired me that they weren't racist. And just the whole call, it was like he was trying to convince me that my case wouldn't be good. And I just told him, back then people hired indentured servants and slaves. Like, does that mean that they're not racist? And then he just boop, just went silent. But other than that, everyone's been pretty helpful. So I can see the culture that you're speaking of. I can definitely see that.
yeah, like you can tell when your lawyer has a personal investment in your story and they
Yeah,
care versus when they're just like, oh, okay, and then what happened? And then what happened? Yeah, that might not be illegal. Yeah, there might be something we can do about that. Okay, like they're just kind of checking off boxes, which can
right.
happen. Like, some lawyers deal with hundreds of cases at a time. They're severely overworked and it's just like they've become so jaded.
Yeah,
You can kind of tell.
right. So let's talk about how sad it is that fighting workplace discrimination is almost taboo for victims, because I've experienced this and heard this from attorneys as well. They'll tell me or other people that the risk of filing against your company is that it's public record and it might damage your career. It's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Um, I have this conversation with my clients a lot because that's part of why we do a few steps before we file a complaint. We'll send a demand letter first. We, have this process in the EEOC first. At any point in time during that, the company can settle with you. And sometimes they will, especially if they have an interest in protecting confidentiality. Like, if I'm suing a women's clinic for sexual harassment, they may not want that to be public. So they'll want to resolve that sooner rather than before it gets filed. When the fact that it becomes public is not like 100%. So technically the court filings are public information, but they're not like filed on Google. They're filed on
Okay.
a court system that not everybody has access to. So The way that it becomes more public is like, let's say you're suing a big company or popular, like your story is just interesting in some way to like a legal journalist. And so they'll write about your case because they have access to the docket. They'll be looking through cases that are filed all the time, looking for interesting things to write about. They may write about it in like a legal journal or something, and that's on Google. So then I'll search your name and I'll see that come up. But it's not necessarily like I can search your name and pull up your whole entire lawsuit most of the time, unless there's
Okay.
some that has that kind of attention. Um, but it's always a chance. Like there's always a possibility that it could be public information. Um, Ultimately, I think it really just depends on your story. Like if what happened to you wasn't serious enough to file a lawsuit, you're probably not going to find an attorney willing to take it on, especially because it's contingency. So,
Right.
am I going to spend all this time and effort fighting your case when there's a very high likelihood that neither of us are getting anything out of it because it's not a very strong case? Um, and there may be companies that will do their research and look up their name and see, oh, I don't know, like she sued a company before. You probably don't want to work for that company. You probably don't want to work for a company that's afraid of getting in trouble for discriminating or sexually harassing their
Right.
employees. That being said, if it ever were to come up in an interview for whatever reason, or like, you think that that was ever a problem, you can explain yourself. You can get ahead of it. Like, it's not your fault that you were discriminated against.
Right.
Um, no one is filing a complaint because somebody was mean to them. Usually, it's a serious situation. There's something you suffered as a result of it. You lost your employment, and now, like, you're put in this position where you have to go look for work again. Maybe the economy's not so great for that. Or your emotional distress rose to a medical level. Some people have to be hospitalized. Some people,
Yeah.
go through a lot. And so that's not ever something you should be apologizing for. If anything, the company should be the one embarrassed about it. Like, the company should be the one embarrassed that if I look up the company's name, I'm going to see that X amount of employees have sued them for this problem.
I totally agree. And I think people really underestimate that stress is a silent killer. I had one friend who worked for a large banking company, and she was really going through it. And what ended up happening was, I think there was like a muscle in her throat that was getting really thin because of all the tension in her body. And so, like you mentioned, she's one of the people I know who ended up hospitalized. And when you are a single mother too, that can be extremely stressful. So I definitely encourage people as well as to not take that lightly because, when you're working 40 to 60 hours a week and your body's constantly tense, there's long-term injuries that can happen.
Definitely. So, I mean, yeah, it's something that you have to be aware of, but I don't think it's ever something you should be afraid of.
Yeah,
You don't want to work for a company that's not going to hire you because they anticipate this could be a problem and they don't want that problem from you. Like, you're
right.
dodging a bullet for yourself. And if you have to explain yourself, you didn't do anything wrong. If anything, it's like you should feel bad for me. Look at what these people put me through.
Right. It's like, damn right I sued them.
You should be proud of
Yeah.
me.
Like how strong I fight for myself, I'm gonna fight for your company too.
Yeah, you can say anything. Sell yourself. Sell
Right. Spin
lawsuit.
spin a good story, right. So if the case, goes public and you win your trial, how do you feel, what would it be like for a victim who won their trial to speak about what happened to them on, say, TikTok or Instagram? Would that company be able to come back and sue them, or how would that go? Because I see a lot of people on TikTok sharing their stories, and sometimes I'll think to myself, is nothing gonna happen to them? So,
Yeah, usually you can't do that. I would be very surprised if a company gave you a settlement agreement that didn't have some sort of a confidentiality clause in it. And anytime we settle a case or like, at the end, like 2% of cases actually go to trial. So there is a possibility that like, you won at trial and in the end you're free, you can say whatever you want. But especially because everything's kind of already been put out there because you were in trial. But most of the cases get settled. And so whether they get settled in the first 6 months or like 2 years down the line, there's going to be that confidentiality factor. And I'm like really, really strict about going through that settlement agreement with my clients and making sure they understand because in a lot of cases, like if you break that clause or any other clause, the company can sue you back for the money they paid you.
Mm,
Um,
okay.
so yeah, social media has become a really big problem in that way because it can get you in a lot of like, what is that going to do for you? People, TikTok has given people this, or not just, I mean, all social media, this like false sense of victory where you can go online, you can tell everybody about this thing that this company did to you. Is it going to make the company go out of business? No. Is it going to make you any money? Probably not. So you may get some attention for it. People may be like, wow, that's terrible. Like this company sucks.
Right.
But at the end of the day, like keep it in the courtroom, keep it somewhere where it's going to actually benefit you. And then if you can be free and talk about it, go for it. But like, why? I just don't see how like that court of public opinion would be more valuable than being able to actually get something out of it that helps you move on with your life.
Right. So would they be able to, if they wanted to help other people just relate, and give advice, would they be able to speak about it but be very vague? Because let's say they worked for 5 different companies in the past and they don't specify which one it was. Do you think that would still have some blowback?
I mean, you can talk about it and say, I worked for a company in the past. This is kind of what I went through in terms of like discrimination. You definitely don't want to say how much you settled for. That's really the biggest part of the confidentiality clause. And some confidentiality clauses are different. Like some just restrict it to anything that had to do with your settlement. So they don't want anybody to know how much money you got out of them or anything like that because they don't want the next guy to come up and say, well, she got this much, so I should be able to get this much.
Yeah.
Some will restrict it to you talking about anything related to your employment. It really just depends on what's in that clause. But whatever's not in that clause, you can speak about vaguely. It doesn't mean you can never say that you were discriminated against or that you went through this type of situation. You just need to be careful and evaluate what your clause says so that you don't screw yourself over.
Right. After going through all of that. Right. So what actionable measures do you feel like POC communities can undertake to, mitigate the challenges faced in pursuing corporate opportunities? Like, what would you suggest that as a community, what can we do to level out the playing field and facilitate better support systems for us?
Um, I mean, I think that spreading education and looking out for other people is really the best thing that you can do. If you see something happening to somebody else, like it's okay to tell them, "Hey, did you know that they can't do this?" Like
Right.
to that you can protect yourself from that. You can go to HR, you can not everybody knows that you can do these things, that you can protect yourself from these things. And unfortunately, the people who are less likely to know about it are probably the people that it happens to the most.
Yeah.
Um, and bringing people up with you. Like I love hearing stories of like HR people will do interviews and they're like, "So, how much money are you looking for?" And the girl's like, "Oh, I don't know, like 60,000." And they're like, "As a maid." Like,
Yeah.
like it's like you we can do things to help each other. 'Cause
Right.
at the end of the day, like the company's paying you. Some people kind of forget, like especially as they get in positions higher up, like you do not own this company. Um you don't need to like defend them and protect them like this is your like baby. I don't really know why like people will take things so personally even from a position like sometimes like you'll go into a store and like someone's working there and looking down on you like can you even shop here and it's like
What? But you work here.
yeah, like it's just and so that happens also in employment like all of a sudden you're in a managerial position and it's
Right. It's
like
like relax. Like,
and so, yeah, I think like remembering kind of when you were in that position and what would have been helpful for you and helping
yeah.
bring other people up in that. Like that's a really big thing I try to do on TikTok is like bring more POC into the legal profession because who's going to look out for you and help you more
Right.
than your own kind? Like
Yeah.
somebody else might hear your story and be like, "Oh, are you being a little dramatic?" And then someone who looks like you might hear your story and be like, "Totally get it. It's happened to me 100
Right.
times." let's talk about it. So, I think that a big part of it is really just looking out for each other, because looking out for yourself will only get you so far. Like you go so much farther
Right.
together.
What I've noticed is that so many people that I've come across who are struggling, they are so foreign to, they just they feel like they're not even capable of hiring a lawyer because they've never heard of contingency. They don't know that it's an option. And I think, they're sometimes shocked to hear that I sued someone or I am suing someone in the process of it. And I honestly think the only reason why I'm comfortable enough is because my dad, I've seen him sue so many people. And if it wasn't for him, I feel like I would be a little scared too. So I totally get it. Some people think that winning a case is just so far out of their reach.
Yeah, or that like suing is for rich people. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
just not the case. So I think sharing information is really like education is just the best way to combat ignorance. And sharing education
Definitely.
is the best way to do it.
Ah, I love all the wisdom that you've dropped on us today. Thank you so much for sharing, Janelle. I really think that people who, are seeking representation and advice are going to, find so much value from this Q&A.
So I recently joined a nationwide firm, which is awesome because I can now represent employees outside of New York. So if you have any questions, I can also now offer free consultations. So if you want to have your case evaluated, don't be afraid to reach out.
Okay, we'll be sure to leave the details in the caption. Great. Okay, thank you, Janelle.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.